Thanks for tuning in to the OFN meeting room as we talk Miami Dolphins football. And whenever we talk Miami Dolphins football, that means we are joined by Alan Pupar, publisher for All Dolphins at the Maven SI NFL Network. Alan, thanks for taking your time to talk to us again.
My pleasure. Anytime, Greg.
All right, Alan. So we talked about the possibilities of the Dolphins angering their fans and not taking Tua with the 5th overall pick. They stood pat. They couldn't move up. We knew that wasn't going to happen, and they took Tua. So I'm assuming a collective sigh of relief went all over South Florida when they made the pick.
Oh, that's major understatement right there. I think it was more like a big shout of excitement than a collective sigh of relief. I mean, this is the guy the fan base wanted, and it might have been a revolt if they had not taken Tua, especially if he was available at the time they came to pick.
Yeah, when we were going over their needs, interesting. We talked about obviously quarterback, so they go with their quarterback with the 1st overall pick. We talked about the offensive line, so 2nd overall pick for the team, and 3 picks in their first 7 went to offensive linemen. We talked about edge rushers. Well, they added 2 in round 5. We talked about DBs. They added 2 in their top 6 picks. We even talked about a potential wide receiver. They added him in round 7. And a defensive tackle with, a penetrator that could disrupt in the passing downs. And Raekwon Davis was selected in round 2. The only position that we talked about that they did not pick or use the draft pick on was at running back.
Correct. And that was a surprise to a lot of people, especially since they had so many chances in the 2nd round. When they came to pick at number 39, pretty much everybody was still available except for DeAndre Swift and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They could have had Jonathan Taylor. They could have had J.K. Dobbins. Instead of that spot, they took Robert Hunt, doubling down on offensive lineman after taking Austin Jackson in the 1st round. Then what they could have done with the draft capital they had the flexibility to maybe throw a 1 or 2 later round pick to jump ahead of Baltimore, which got J.K. Dobbins at 55, which was a spot right before the Dolphins made their second of their 2 second-round picks, and then they took Raekwon Davis over there. They did get their running back by trading a 5th-round pick for Matt Breida from the 49ers.
That's true.
Who is a great compliment to Jordan Howard.
Yes. Because
he's a speedy back to the physical style, the lightning to Howard's thunder, if you will. My only concern there is if Taylor or Dobbins become complete studs for several years to come, then the Dolphins are going to regret not having used one of those 2nd-round picks or their draft capital to get one of those running backs.
Yeah, because as of right now, Breida, is he the starter? Do you think?
I would. He's more like a change of pace, 3rd down type of back.
Okay.
Whereas Howard is more like your 1st, 2nd down type of back in a traditional offense.
Sure.
So depending on exactly what the Dolphins do, there's a talk there's going to be a whole lot of RPO, especially if Tua winds up being the quarterback early on. So maybe that changes things to where they want a pass receiving back on the field more so. But they'll both play a lot. Yeah. I don't think it makes a major difference who starts.
But right now, there isn't that really young. I mean, Brady's only been in the league a couple of years. But again, like you said, he's more of a situational guy. That's got to be, right now, as of today, one of their top priorities next year.
It could be the issue with Breida also is he was a restricted free agent this offseason. The 49ers extended the tender. He signed the tender, but he's going to be an unrestricted free agent next offseason unless the Dolphins sign him to a new deal. So he could be one and done in Miami for all. And Jordan Howard's a nice player, but is he a feature back, a guy who could become a stud? Maybe not. So yes, it could be a need into 2021 draft, certainly.
Okay, let's break down the players. We know about Tua, so the only thing I'm going to, as far as his tool set and so forth, but I guess the only thing I got to ask you regarding him, and I'm sure Miami Dolphin fans, this is really all they care about right now, knowing he's on the team, is when are they going to get him in there? So how do you think the Dolphins are going to handle that?
Very carefully, is how I would say. Hey, listen, this is the guy he's the future of the franchise. So they're going to be very careful in not rushing him either from a preparation standpoint or from a health standpoint as far as his hip is concerned. Now, every report that we've gotten is the hip's fine. It's back to normal. as far as learning the offense, the fact that they're not being able to be on the field right now because of what's going on around the country, that doesn't help. I mean, the more reps he gets on the practice field, the better. But once he shows to the Dolphins he's ready to perform at a high level, both physically and in terms of preparation and knowing the offense and all that, there's absolutely no reason to hold him back. The question is, when is that going to be? And also the fact that they have Ryan Fitzpatrick, who played so well for them last year, gives them reason not to rush anything. The idea is that not necessarily 2021 or 2020, I should say, but Tua is going to be your starting quarterback, ideally for the next 10 years. So you want to maximize the chances for success in that situation.
Any chance Josh Rosen hangs around for a few years as the backup? That's as good as it's going to get, or is it about another team calling the Dolphins one day and saying, "Hey, we're willing to trade you something for him," and maybe give the Dolphins a deal they can't resist?
Correct. I don't think the Dolphins would turn down a mid-round pick if a team called with that. But right now, there's no reason to just give him away. I mean, the guy is on a very, very nice deal for any team that has him. He's still very young. In fact, he's younger than Joe Burrow. And there's still a lot of physical traits that haven't gone away. I mean, he's tall, he can move, and he's got a very good arm. So is the light going to come on for him? Pardon the cliche, but in terms of the issues he has to work on, which is basically processing in the pocket and quicker decision making, who knows? But there's no reason to just give him away.
Okay, now with the second pick, again, as I mentioned, they chose 3 offensive linemen with their picks between the first and the 4th round. Austin Jackson was the first pick, and it made a lot of sense when they went after Tua with the first pick, that even though Jackson wasn't one of the top offensive tackles after Wirfs being the 4 of the 4, that Jackson was the 5 of, if you want to say a 5, or he was the beginning of the next group of top tackles. So the Dolphins were able to land him, and then we'll get to Robert Hunt, which some people might think was a player that was drafted a little higher, but we'll get into that. And Kindley was taken as a guard in the 4th round. So start with Jackson. And when we're talking about players like Jackson from USC, I don't know, I always get concerned with USC guys for whatever reason. But he's a big guy. He's light on his feet for his size at 322. He's got some aggressive style in his play. Is he a day one starter?
Not necessarily.
Really? Okay.
Not necessarily. And again, and I'm going to be saying this a lot between now and the start of the regular season, what the Dolphins are doing is building for the long run. I think in Austin Jackson, they took a guy who most draft analysts would tell you has all the physical attributes to become a very good offensive tackle in the NFL, but may need some time to refine some of his technique and maybe work on his strength and stuff like that. Again, with the same situation as Tua, you don't want to put him in there before he's ready. So there's no guarantee, there's no need for him to start right away. The flip side to that is the guy who started most of the year last year was Julian Davenport, who came over in the Laramie Tunsil trade, and he had his rough spots as well. So again, if the Dolphins feel that they're not going to be setting Jackson back by putting him in before he's ready to go, yes, absolutely, he could start day one. Is it guaranteed? No, I don't believe it's guaranteed.
Okay, now let's get to Hunt because he had as far as our lads, he had a 5th round grade, but Dolphins went top pick 2nd round, 39th overall. And even though he appears to be a developmental player, he's the type, I got to think that the Dolphins just saw a player that they feel, okay, yeah, it might be a developmental player, but boy, do we like the upside that if we can really mold this guy, he has the talent to be around here for a long time as one of our starters, either at tackle or at guard.
Absolutely. And he's another guy like Jackson, who's a big guy who can move. And you can get your hands on those guys, you try to do it. Like you mentioned, he's another guy like Jackson. There's no guarantee he's going to start from day one. There's no rush to start him from day one. The Dolphins returned Jesse Davis as their right tackle if they want to go that route. If they want to throw Hunt in there from the start to get him on the learning curve right away, they could do that as well. They could slide Jesse Davis inside to right guard. That's another option they have. But he's a guy who I understand you guys didn't have a very high grade on. There were other draft people who were a lot higher on him that saw really, really major amount of upside to where he could become a really good pick. And there were some who actually thought that was one of their best picks.
Well, again, yeah, I think the only difference was developmental time. That here's a guy with, and matter of fact, I think specifically Arled said it's hard to find players with his kind of size, athletic ability, and body control capabilities. He has that kind of foot speed and quickness that you're looking for from a former basketball player, high school basketball player. So for a guy that big that can move like that, yeah, this looks like a guy that if he's developed properly could be a really good player. But again,
Sure.
Developmental player. And when you're talking developmental player, that's when, you just, should a developmental player really go in the second round? I guess I didn't make the scouting report. I'm just guessing that's the reason why Arlen said what he said what they said.
No, but again, in 3 or 4 years, whether he was developmental or not will not matter if the guy panned out.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing. You look at their third first-round pick, Igbenogany, was a guy who, again, the scouting report on him is the same. He's a great athlete, really tough cornerback, maybe a little bit of a developmental project to fully realize his potential. So he fits the pattern of what the Dolphins did with their picks. And again, in 3 years, if those guys all pan out.
And if you like a guy that good, you're not going to wait. You have
Correct.
So many picks that the Dolphins have, and it's such a need position. And that's the thing about, as we know, following every team in this league, all it takes is one coach on one team that looks at one player and go, yes, I love that guy. I can make that guy into an all-pro, a 10-year guy. Just get him for me. And it's not a surprise that he did go where he went. The difference between whether or not he should or not, who cares? Fact is, the kid's got a lot of talent. And he's going to get the time to potentially work himself into the rotation. And who knows, maybe even start as early as next year if all goes well. So what about Kindle?
Well, I was going to say, and if we go back to Igbenogany, the plan, if you look at their roster right now, is he starts in that nickel between Xavier Howard and Byron Jones. And who knows where Logan Ryan fits into all of that if he winds up signing with the Dolphins.
All right, now Kinley, coming from Georgia, and just looking at Georgia this past year, that all of their linemen were above graded as run blockers. Really, of course, Thomas was the top of the heap. But pass blocking, that was what needed work. But right away, this kid Kinley is probably already, he has the capability of being a starter because that's how good he is as a run blocker. Now, does he have everything it takes to start day one? Well, that's what we'll find out.
And obviously, he's a guy the Dolphins really like because they traded up in the fourth round to get him. They had 2 fourth-round picks. I think it was 136 and 141. And they gave both of those up to move up to 111 to get Kinley at a position where they have a lot of young players, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unproven young players, but they had a lot of guys there available for competition, including either Jesse Davis or Robert Hunt, depending on who you wind up playing at right tackle, along with Shaq Calhoun, who started some games last year as a rookie free agent, along with Michael Dieter, who started, I believe it was 15 games or 14 games at left guard, switching over, and Denny Isidoro, who the Dolphins got in the trade from Minnesota. So they had options at right guard, even though none of them were proven. So to bring in another guy in the fourth round, trading up 2 fourth-round picks to move up to get him, tells you the Dolphins really, really liked him. Big dude. We'll say that for him. He's a big dude.
And you have to feel real good that you come out of the draft, if you're the Dolphins, needing so much help on the offensive line, to get these 3 linemen with the talent that they have, and if all goes well, coaching and all that, this could be one of those drafts that really defines the offensive line for many years.
Oh, no question. And they've gone that route before. I mean, I did a story a while back, looking back. This was actually the 4th time they drafted an offensive lineman in both the first and second rounds. They did it. 1979 was the first time. It worked out okay because one of them was a really good player. They did it in 1990 with Richmond Webb in the first round and Keith Sims in the second round. That worked out really well because Webb's a borderline Hall of Famer, and Keith Sims made 3 Pro Bowls. And they did it in 2005 with Billy Milner and Andrew Green, and that didn't work out at all. So obviously the Dolphins are hoping the results are more like 1990.
All right, let's go to their third choice in round one, and I'm just going to call him the cornerback from Auburn. I'll let you pronounce his last name. I can get knowing, of course, that you follow the team and I don't. You'll probably have a better grasp on how we should pronounce his last name. But you got an Alabama kid that transferred to Auburn, so you got to love that. He started off at Alabama as a kick returner and a receiver, moves to Auburn, starts the last 2 years as a corner. You could just tell from the tape and just from everything we've heard about this kid that he's got so much upside because he's just only been starting the last couple of years as a corner at the SEC level, but already good speed, good tackling ability, and could start off right away in the kick return game.
Yep. And at nickel. And I think the key word you mentioned there is a good tackler. And that's something that obviously Brian Flores wants in his defensive backs. And the thing again with the philosophy of Brian Flores, if you remember his last year with the Patriots when he was the de facto defensive coordinator, even though he didn't have the title, is their secondary was outrageous. I mean, they had Stephon Gilmore, the McCourty twins, Jonathan Jones, Duron Harmon, Patrick Chung. So what he's trying to duplicate that philosophy, that vision of like building a defense from the back toward the front. Mm-hmm. And this is why he's just getting players and players. And now they've got a lot of guys who can cover, and they've got some guys who can tackle as well, because Xavier Howard's a good tackler, Byron Jones a good tackler. Igbenogany is also a very good tackler.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Brandon Jones, third round choice. We'll stick with the DBs, and like Noah, another guy that should fit right away on special teams. He's a really good core special teams type player. Again, the scouting report talks about his toughness. As a high motor kid, he's versatile. He even played in the slot, I believe, last year for Texas. So this is the perfect kind of guy that you want to build in your secondary, a guy that could do a lot of things, including play right away on special teams and do it well.
And another big thing with him, he's another very good tackler. So if you detect a trend over there too. Also a very, very high character guy. There's NFL produced a video of him talking about his life, how his dad passed away from cancer when he was a kid, and he basically took on a mentorship role for his 3 brothers or 4 brothers. And that shows you the kind of character that he had. He also befriended a young kid who had cancer out in Texas last year and was with there through his old chemotherapy and supporting him the whole way. So very high character kind of kid, can do a lot of different things. Versatility is very big for Brian Flores, as we've known since he took over as head coach. And again, a good tackler as well, and no doubt will contribute right away on special teams.
Okay, second round pick, the second pick, nose tackle Raekwon Davis, who actually can play a couple of different roles along the line for Miami. But you're talking about an elite tool set combining hustle, length, and speed. He is a player that I think the knock on him is that he produced and was such a dominating player as a sophomore. The last couple of years, he's just been okay. He never seemed to take that next step. But that's what the coaching staff is for. The coaching staff is to get the best out of him. And if they can get the best out of this kid, they can have a big-time player on their hands.
Well, he certainly looks the part. I mean, you're looking for 3-4 defensive linemen. He's long. He's thick. And you mentioned his production in 2017. It was 8.5 sacks, which is outrageous for an interior defensive lineman. And then the last 2 years, I believe, is 1.5 sacks combined for those 2 years. And needless to say, that was something that was brought up when we spoke to Brian Flores and Chris Greer after the draft. And they made the point that you can get too hung up on stats, that sometimes you're the one who creates opportunities for plays for others because of the attention you draw and because of the offensive lineman you occupy. So they weren't too concerned from that aspect. He was an interesting pick. He's the one that kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. But again, if he plays like he played in 2017, that's going to be quite a steal for the Dolphins.
And speaking of defensive tackles who will, especially because there's usually a couple different profiles on those guys, are they going to be guys that are going to make plays, penetrate, production, stats, or you're going to get a guy that mostly is going to do all the dirty work and let the other guys make the plays? Benito Jones might be that player, the one of the top free agents that they signed, draftable kid out of Ole Miss, another SEC school, was a 5-star recruit, started most of his 4 years with the school. I think the Dolphins should. I mean, I got to believe they were very excited to know that they were able to sign Benito Jones after the draft.
Yeah, no question. And he's one of those guys, probably one of the most likely candidates to make the team as a rookie free agent. Dolphins had quite a few of those last year. They're not going to have nearly as many this year because their roster base is much better than it was last year. But this is a guy, I mean, he went to the Senior Bowl, went to the Combine. Kind of interesting that he wound up not getting drafted, but this is a guy who, again, with a clear opportunity to make this roster, because the Dolphins do need, for lack of a better term, they need a grunt in the middle of that defensive line to do the dirty work.
All right, round 5. That's when the Dolphins went after a couple of edge rushers, Jason Strowbridge from North Carolina and Curtis Weaver from Boise State. Strowbridge is a versatile player, so I'm sure that's what the Dolphins like about him as well. They're going to be able to move him around. He's not going to be pigeonholed into one spot. Curtis Weaver, meanwhile, 34 sacks in 3 years at Boise State. All-time leader at the school as far as the Mountain West Conference, Boise State, since, they've had a very good defense over the last few years. He's been a huge part of that. To get him as a 3rd-round grade, to get him in the 5th round was potentially a steal for Miami. But basically, to get both players there in the 5th round who are going to help out as far as edge rushers are concerned was a good couple of players to get.
But I would think Weaver is going to be the one who basically going to tell him, Curtis, you see that quarterback over there? Go get him. Whereas Strowbridge, I think he's going to be asked to play a lot of different roles. Yeah. Maybe more of a run defense guy, rush the passer at times. He's also very good on special teams. Blocked, I believe it was like 3 or 4 kicks during his college career. So he can help in a lot of different ways. Versatile player, which again is a buzzword with Coach Brian Flores. Weaver, not so much, but what Weaver does is get to the quarterback. The thing about Weaver is you talk to every scout, you look at him, and it's basically doesn't have a prototypical NFL body, not particularly quick, doesn't have a great jump off the line of scrimmage, except all he does is get sacks. Question now, is that going to translate to the NFL? Yep. We'll know soon enough, and spending a 5th-round pick on a guy with that kind of production in college, got to go for it.
Absolutely. That's why in the 3rd round, you might have been, well, I don't know, Mountain West Conference. It's not SEC. It's not the Big Ten and so forth. But you get him in the 5th round. Now you got, if it works out, great. It's like gravy. If it doesn't work out, well, he's a 5th-round pick. So what are we going to do?
It could be one of those deals where a bunch of scouts are like, there's nothing. His game is kind of like, don't know if it's going to translate because not terribly fast and not terribly big, and then somebody else will be like, whoops. And then somebody else will be like, yeah, but all he does is get sacked.
That's
it.
Let's
get him.
Yeah, absolutely. Some players just don't test well at the Combine or on Pro Day, but some players are just football players.
Zach Thomas.
There you go. And by the way, Strowbridge probably will give the Dolphins, his skill set as far as pass rushing is actually better on the interior. So when they move him inside, maybe even on passing downs, that's possibly where he could excel. So I shouldn't have.
Correct, because they
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say they do have a lot of edge rushers, especially after they got Shaq Lawson and Emmanuel Ogbah in free agency, and then Curtis Weaver in the draft. So they do have a lot of edge rushers. Vince Beagle, I should mention as well.
All right, and then they got the long snapper. Would you take a long snapper in the draft at all, especially in the 6th round? It's not the 7th. Does that mean the chances are he's going to make the team?
No, it means you're a lock to make the team. In fact, the Dolphins waived their long snapper from last year the day after the draft.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, and then there was a stat that he missed more tackles than any other long snapper in the NFL last year.
Nice.
And who knows if that played a role in that. And the ironic part is that long snapper from last year, Tabor Pepper, is good friends with Blake Ferguson, the guy who they basically drafted to replace him.
Okay. And then the 7th round, intriguing. They get Malcolm Perry from Navy. And so, of course, the first thing I have to do, because I remember Keenan Reynolds a lot. I love Navy. They're one of my favorite college programs to watch, especially when they have the big games and especially when they have dangerous quarterbacks that could run the triple option like Keenan Reynolds did and like Malcolm Perry did. The big difference between the two, when you take a look and kind of remember what Keenan Reynolds made him a better quarterback in college, was Reynolds could throw the ball. But the Dolphins aren't asking Malcolm Perry to throw the football. And he at least had experience, I believe when he was a freshman, as a slot receiver. So he already had that experience, something Keenan Reynolds didn't have. So Keenan Reynolds really, he's just been bouncing around. I think Malcolm Perry, who actually was graded higher by our lads coming into this draft than even Keenan Reynolds was, who was a running back, Perry receiver, I think that has a lot to do with it. Was that Perry has got experience as a receiver, and that could suit him out really well as a slot receiver. Practice squad maybe first year, and then who knows?
He might even make the roster.
He might.
First year, who knows?
Yeah.
The ratio of draft picks who don't make the initial 53-man roster is, I mean, there are not a lot of guys draft picks don't make the roster. Here's the thing about Perry that's interesting is the Dolphins list him as a running back.
Okay.
On their roster, even though he worked and prepared for the combine as a wide receiver. You mentioned his experience as a slot receiver at Navy. He also practiced returning punts at Navy, so you could be used in that role.
Sure.
He could be used as a slot guy. He could be used if the Dolphins want to throw a wrinkle and run the option or run a wildcat. They have a guy who can throw the ball there. So there's a lot of different things they could do with him. And you look at him and you can't help but think, could he possibly become like another Julian Edelman, college quarterback who turned out to be pretty good.
Sure.
Yeah, pretty good wide receiver.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if you take a look at Perry, he led the nation with runs of 20 or more yards. He had 26 of them last year. So, I mean, he's electric with the ball in his hands. He's very hard. He's not a big guy, but he's very hard. He's going to go down as soon as you get a hold of him, but you got to get a hold of him. That's what makes him nifty, swifty, whatever you want to call it. But that's going to be his calling card at the next level. I'm going to ask you about a couple other free agents, and you can add any that I might not be aware of that the Dolphins were high on. But I just remember Ray Lima at Iowa State as somebody that he was the first team Big 12 in 2018. Didn't have as good as a final year, but then again, the Iowa State defense wasn't as good as it was the year before. They lost players. And Kirk Merritt, I think, was interesting, the receiver, because he was big production at a small Sun Belt college, Arkansas State. Not a guy that's an explosive guy. He's not a downfield threat, but he caught a lot of balls, 19 touchdowns the last 2 years. So those are a couple of guys that stood out for me as a college fan that I know who these guys are. Anybody else or anything about those guys that, other than maybe the practice squad?
I'll give you another one that was interesting. It's another wide receiver, and that's Matt Cole from McKendree, who's at the Division II school in Illinois, who put up crazy numbers out there, runs really, really fast. He's got an opportunity. Again, the Dolphin wide receiver core has a lot of players, a lot of options. What they don't have outside of Devontae Parker is guys who clearly stand out as this guy's a lock to make the roster. This guy's a lock to make the roster. They don't necessarily have that type of guy. So for a young guy like Merritt or Cole, with a big training camp, they could do what Preston Williams did last year, which was coming as a rookie free agent and have a big year and then make the roster. You mentioned Ray Lima. I was blown away by a speech I heard from his coach before their season last year, talking about basically, I'm not the one who turned the program around. Ray Lima turned the program around just because of his attitude and his leadership. And the problem with Ray Lima that he's going to have is the Dolphins do have a lot of people on the interior of the defensive line, and he one of them being the fellow rookie free agent Benito Jones.
Yep. All right. So right now, until we hear actual news, you can throw all the preseason and regular season schedules and dates at us all they want. And things are looking good. There's no question about that. But until we get training camp will start on this date, we're still kind of all in limbo. So Dolphin fans that want to get the latest on what's going on, how do you keep them up to date? What kind of information are you able to keep them up to date with, especially since you can't just stroll down the camp?
There is no camp.
Yeah.
Anything and everything that's going on, we're on it. That's how I would say it.
Okay. Sounds good. And of course, you've been following the team for quite a long time. You had your own magazine publication for the Miami Dolphins. How long did you have that publication for?
Started working for Dolphin Digest in 1989.
Wow.
And it's still going.
30 years, over 30 years. That's awesome.
And I'm still editor of Dolphin Digest. Yes.
Excellent. All right, Alan, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to talking to you, hopefully just before training camp starts, whenever it does start.
Sounds good. Thanks, Greg.